Good evening, forum attendees. So as we calm down and get ready for the last lap before we break, our final panel will discuss American universities and Internationalist Islamist Axis. It will be moderated by Daniel Pipes. Daniel is the founder and chairman of the Middle East Forum, of course, an organization he has led since 1994. He earned both his bachelor's and doctoral degrees from Harvard and has taught at institutions including Harvard, the University of Chicago, Pepperdine, and the U.S. Naval War College. Daniel has served in 5 U.S. administrations, received 2 presidential appointments, and testified before Congress on multiple occasions. He has authored 16 books and has been published in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and numerous other publications. His work has been translated into 39 languages. Neetu Arnold is a political analyst at the Manhattan Institute, writing on education reform. Her work has been cited in Congress and published in Wall Street Journal and City Journal. It's a great magazine. Craig Considine is a sociologist at Rice University, an author of several books on interfaith relations, including The Humanity of Muhammad. He is a leading voice on Muslim-Christian engagement and lectures globally. Sam Westrop is head of Islamist Watch. Previously, he ran Stand for Peace, a London-based counter-extremism organization monitoring Islamists throughout the UK. Daniel is also the most esteemed and prized sounding board and critic of my poetry.
Thank you for your stalwart attendance. Now, I have come to call this the invalid panel, because with the exception of Neetu Arnold, all 3 of us are substitutes for panelists and moderator who could not make it because of illness. So 3/4 of us are substitutes, but we're just as good. Now, in Michael Rubin's spirit, I will be seen and not heard. But as I told the panelists in my note to them, I'm a very, very nice person, except when I'm moderating and keeping track of time. So I will be ruthless, so we can get on time, and so you will have an opportunity to ask questions. Now, my initial question to you, the panel, is, before we get into the specifics of our topic about the university and the Islamists, my initial question is this a moment of inflection? I mean, an awful lot of attention is being paid to American universities, in particular my alma mater. Is this a point of inflection? Are things changing? If you could give me a couple minutes of your thoughts on that question. Let's start with you, Neetu.
Well, I think that's a great question to start off with. American universities in 2025 are finally beginning to open up to change. But are we, the long-term critics, ready to lead that change? Do we have the skill and the integrity to lead higher education in a better direction? Or are we only capable of criticism and destruction? So these are some of the questions that I've been thinking about over the past couple of months as we see what's happening at Harvard and other universities across the country. And I actually laid out my thoughts on this issue more broadly in higher education in Politico yesterday. That article is called "Trump is Right to Target Colleges, but He's Doing It Completely the Wrong Way." So I lay out my argument there, but I wanted to make one point very clear here today that I think is most relevant to the discussion we're having today, and it's that I think it's important to have a clear long-term vision, and that's by tying political willpower and having consistent principles. I think consistent principles matter, especially when it comes to how we lead higher education and what we want to see for the future. And this is something I will be touching on later in this panel, but I think the concerns I have right now is how some of the leadership is handling issues like Qatar and what kinds of what's the message that we're sending when we accept luxury gifts from Qatar, but universities are also accepting those kinds of gifts?
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Well, I hope that universities are at this inflection stage, but I have my reservations about this. I think what we're seeing with the very real changes are not organic. I think the reason why we do see some of these recent changes is because there's being pressure from the White House. I don't necessarily think this would be necessarily happening if there wasn't pressure from the top. Now, Neetu, you mentioned, instead of just criticizing, what can we do? What's real action plan? I would like to see two things. Different hiring practices. Making sure that the faculty are not stuck in an echo chamber, which is basically one big type of groupthink where there's no real dissent amongst the ranks. The second point is the curriculum itself. Now, I might be a little biased because I'm in sociology, which is extra liberal, but I think this applies across the social sciences. The curriculum has to change, and I would like for a lot of the curriculum to not be so anti-American. We can have healthy criticism of our country, and we should. If we are responsible citizens, we should absolutely have that. But I think many academics like myself, who are not super liberal-leaning, are concerned about the curriculum itself. So I would like to be hopeful, but I have very real reservations.
As Daniel mentioned, I and a few others are replacement speakers here. My focus is not usually campuses. So with that equivocal premise, let me provide a slightly more strident answer, which is no, this is not an inflection point. The withdrawal of money is small enough not to destroy the bad forces at work in universities. It is also small enough to let Islamists and foreign states step in to fill that funding void. Ideologically, when groups are shut down on campus, they re-emerge under new names with the same people. I've seen no change over the last few months other than ammunition that allows our enemies to recruit all the more easier on university campuses.
Okay, thank you. So to get to the main topic, what is on your mind in answer to the question about what the title of the panel calls the International Islamist Axis and the American University?
Well, I'm concerned about Qatar's investments in our universities. And I think, I imagine everybody here is somewhat familiar with Qatar, but I don't like to make assumptions about what you may or may not know, especially when it comes to universities. So I'm just going to start off with some of the basic facts. $6.5 billion in Qatar funds go to American universities. Now, 97% of Qatari funds are concentrated among 6 universities: Texas A&M, Cornell University, Northwestern. Okay, wait, we're going off the top of my head here. I should not have started listing. Let's see, Carnegie Mellon. There are 2 others. I'm totally not remembering it right now, but I'm...
Over what period of time?
This is going back to 2001, and this is what's reported to the federal government. So there are 6 branch campuses. They were all funded to teach a specific subject. So for instance, Georgetown might focus on politics. Cornell will focus on medical education for Qatari students. And this is part of a much larger investment plan by Qatar to fund our universities. And it's really about normalizing relationships with the United States. Giving money to universities, giving money to education is typically seen as a positive investment. And so when Qatar gives money to us, invests in our universities, it's usually seen as a positive investment. And it makes these kinds of gifts that Qatar gives to us, it makes it easier for the United States to overlook, Qatar's support for Muslim Brotherhood or Hamas and its uncomfortable relationship with Iran. So, I think, I noticed this just recently when I was testifying in Louisiana earlier this month on foreign funds transparency. And a question a lawmaker asked me was, Louisiana got quite a bit of Qatar money after Hurricane Katrina, and it was for aid. So he said, well, what's the problem? Isn't that helpful to us? And I think that kind of illustrates what this giving does. It makes people very sympathetic to Qatar. And again, we overlook some of their wrongdoings, we'll say. And so this brings me to the point of why I'm concerned with President Trump even considering taking a luxury jet from Qatar that's worth about $400 million. One thing he said was, you're a loser if you don't take this kind of money, if you don't take this kind of gift. And that makes me wonder, well, are our universities winners then for taking money from Qatar? And it concerns me that we may not get a lot of reform done on that area if our own lawmakers are willing to take that kind of money. I want to close off with one more thing here, because this is something that's been on my mind. It's kind of bothered me. When we're talking about foreign influence, foreign money, what's going to our universities, and how we solve that issue, you'll hear a lot of lawmakers talk about going after Qatar and China. But when it actually comes down to action, that's where I've seen quite a bit of hesitation even addressing Qatar. And the fact that we have lawmakers that are taking money from Qatar and then changing their tunes about that country and what they're funding and who they're working with and the investments we see in our universities, it does make me concerned. And I think the best way to perhaps even overcome that is to open that discussion up to this room and maybe brainstorm and think about ways to overcome that.
Thank you.
So yes, of course, the money, right? Money talks. This is certainly important. But I'm concerned about these foreign countries providing moral support to students. And we know, if you just watch the TV over the last couple years, groups like SJP have been very aggressive with their operations. And I'm also concerned that, of course, that these groups are supported by this International Axis. I think that has been well established. But I'm also even more concerned that the universities are not doing enough to crack down on some of these activities. And Dr. Pipes, you told me I could be a little personal, so I'm going to provide a little snippet of information that has been unfolding over the last 2 years. So I'm at Rice University. In May of 2024, I took my phone out and made a little video about the protests. And I criticized the protests for being essentially pro-Hamas. And I said that these students may not know exactly what's happening, but they're doing the dirty work for the enemies of Israel and for our country. The day after that video was released, the president of SJP at Rice, who was in some of my classes, because I'm in sociology, I can't not take a student in, of course, sent me an email, and I'll spare you all the details, but it wasn't very nice. And he was saying that I'm a threat to him, and I didn't respond. Simultaneously, the local care chapter, the head of the local care chapter, went on a tirade on X, attacking me, and again, I'll spare you the details, but every awful word imaginable was shared on my page. The next day, the head of my department sent me an email, and he said this: every single graduate student in the Department of Sociology signed a 3-page letter asking you to remove me, asking my boss to remove me with a bunch of demands. So I had to go in, I had to meet my head of department, and he said an official investigation is opening up. Fast forward to August, still have no word about how Rice ruled on my case. Now, throughout May to August, my team and I also noticed that my Wikipedia page, which is not mine, if you're familiar with Wikipedia, you know it's open to the public. My page was being absolutely butchered, hacked, all the accomplishments I've made pulled out, and they started adding defamatory information. So I finally said, what is going on? And this might be the best thing that my PhD research skills got me. I decided to figure out who this Wikipedia editor is. So I went back 4 years. This Wikipedia editor, his first bio, he said his name, his first name, and he said his 2 degrees. So I said, let's go into Google, type it up. The first hit on Google was a PhD student in my own department. So I took action. I went to the university. I wrote the best report I've ever written in my life, and I've written 8 books. This was the one document I was most proud of because I had all the receipts. He was totally bagged, and he was totally guilty. And the university did nothing. They did absolutely nothing about it. So I'm concerned, of course, for my well-being and my security, because people are after me, and it's not just SJP, it's CARE, and then this opens up to the International Axis, but I'm also concerned that universities are not pushing back enough. And I'll say one more thing, very concerning, the language that's being used. Earlier, I brought up globalize the Intifada. Just a couple weeks ago on campus, there was another protest in reaction to the foreign students. And by the way, the person who attacked me was a foreign student, but they're chanting from the river to the sea, and this is completely allowed on campus. And as I mentioned earlier today, there's a very fine line between free speech and hate speech. And I'm no lawyer on this, but that's hate speech. And the university needs to do more. And certainly the money element is one thing, but I'm concerned about the moral support. You know, even Khomeini, remember he said, oh, if your university is not treating you well, come over. Come over to Iran. This is unacceptable, and universities need to be much tougher in not only pushing back against groups like SJP, but also this foreign influence. It's not just the money, it's also the moral support.
So, like Craig, local Islamism is on my mind as well as it relates to universities. 2 names you might be familiar with, Ibrahim Rasool and Badr Khan Sori. Ibrahim Rasool was the South African ambassador to the United States until just a few months ago, when after a MEF expose talking about his Islamist links and also his personal criticisms of Trump was published, Marco Rubio declared him persona non grata, and South African media credited MEF, in fact, with his removal. Badr Khan Sori was one of the green card arrestees related to his pro-Hamas activism. In fact, his father-in-law is Ahmed Youssef, a very senior Hamas official. He used to be advisor to Ismail Haniyeh. The reason I mention these, both these men are involved in the faculty of the Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, also known as the ACMCU. Now, the ACMCU, and I'm going to mention that a few times, so remember that word, has astonishing links to something called the Safa Network in Virginia. In fact, Badr Khan Sori's father-in-law, the Hamas leader Ahmed Youssef, and Ibrahim Rasool, this deported South African ambassador, are both involved with the Safa Network. In fact, what we have found in an upcoming report, due to be published by us and our partners, the Clarity Coalition, in a few weeks' time, is that over 30 staff of the ACMCU at Georgetown have been involved in this radical network. So what is this network? Well, If you're involved in counterterrorism in the 2000s, you will be very familiar with it. It was a major player in Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad fundraising at the time. More importantly, it's the intellectual hub for the global Muslim Brotherhood. The International Institute for Islamic Thought is one of their think tanks, very important body for the global Muslim Brotherhood. It controls the Safa network. It comprises not just think tanks, but poultry farms, non-profit foundation, banks, institutions, magazines, an incredible array of groups that together have at least $500 million of assets we know about, and the for-profit institutions, being banks, I assume many billions more. Now, our contention, what our report is going to claim, and this is a sneak preview I'm giving you now, is that this Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Muslim Brotherhood nexus established, staffed, funded, and developed this major institution at Georgetown University. We have the receipts. We can prove this. Now, why this matters, the ACMCU is a training ground. If you are interested in the Muslim world and you want to work for the intelligence services, for the State Department, in academia, in journalism, you go through the ACMCU if you want to get hired. It is the go-to ground. We believe Islamists have been training the previous 3 generations of American diplomats, of American thinkers and activists. This is a terrifying realization. And just to show you how extraordinary this is, John Esposito, the founder of the ACMCU, his mentor was a man called Ismail Afruki, the great Muslim Brotherhood ideologue and one of the Safa network founders. In fact, the Safa network has helped the ACMCU not just with its financing, but with its global introduction to Islamism as well. In 2005, there was a much-discussed Saudi grant to Georgetown of 20 million. Now, it was a bit mysterious at the time why there was so much focus on Saudi, because the Qatari money at the time far outstripped the Saudi funding, and it does to this day, almost $1 billion, I believe, in total, since, I'm not sure the time frame, the 1990s perhaps. But when, in 2005, the Saudi money was provided, everyone focused on the fact that a foreign Wahhabi state was the origin of this money. Not so. It was the Safa network in Virginia. Al-Walid bin Talal, the Saudi prince who nominally was the donor, his foundation was staffed by Virginia Islamists, these Hamas, Islamic Jihad Islamists. They set up his foundation, they handled the money, they were there at the handover of the money at a meeting in London, and then they included their staff to watch over how the money was spent. To this day, as I mentioned, 30 staff members. But then the ACMCU has also introduced, Safa network has also introduced ACMCU students, a generation of them, to Islamists across the world. In Turkey, they work with the Center for Islamic and Global Affairs, Center for Islamic and Global Affairs, run by Sami Al-Arian, the former Palestinian Islamic Jihad leader. His son-in-law is a lecturer at ACMCU, Jonathan Brown. His son is Abdullah Al-Arayan, who teaches at Georgetown University in Qatar. It's wonderfully incestuous. In Malaysia, the IIUM is Georgetown ACMCU's partner there. IIUM was founded by Safa, and its rectors and deans of research are Safa officials. It's incredibly incestuous. The Prime Minister of Malaysia, one of the founders of this IIUM institute in Malaysia, is Anwar Ibrahim, founder of Safa. So it continues. In Qatar, the Qatar Foundation hosts Georgetown University in Qatar, who runs the research and who deans at Qatar Foundation, Safa network officials. This is the most extraordinary conspiracy cabal of Islamists that I have come across in quite a while. And I'll stop there because it's a big report, and I think the full details will horrify you in a way that they've horrified us. But yes, leave with this fact in mind. Islamists do not just influence our universities, they control them.
Thank you all. My question, I think, to each of you is the same. What steps need to be taken? You've noted the problem. What's the solution? And I invite the audience to provide questions.
Do I start? Okay. I mean, I've been a big proponent of transparency, making sure we have better reporting laws. You know, currently the federal government requires universities to report foreign funds they receive of $250,000 or more per year. Right now, the current law, that threshold is way too high, so we're asking for it to be lowered to $50,000. And then the a really important reform is making sure there's teeth to the law by making sure there's penalties, audits. It gives universities an incentive to report their funds in the first place and in a timely manner. One other thing you're going to see right now is, and this is right now more at the state level, but there is legislation which is banning partnerships or funds from countries of concern. So this typically includes China, Iran. Notably, what's often excluded from that countries of concern list is Qatar. And so that's going to require changes at the State Department and how they define countries of concern. So really, I think it's being aware of these basic facts. And I also think it's about public pressure on our lawmakers, actually asking them to follow through. When they talk about going after foreign influence and they name Qatar, they should actually be following through and making sure they're going after Qatar and not just saying that to rile up support.
Thank you.
I'm going to say leadership from the very top. The presidents of these universities, who are ultimately, the presidents. They're in charge. They're the executive officer. And they need to show courage. They need to put principle over profit or money. And they need to not be afraid of students. I think a lot of these universities are afraid of the students. And this points to a much bigger thing, going back to the money. These students are customers. Academia is increasingly run like a business. You can't upset the customers. If you upset the customers, they might leave, they might rebel. This is not good. So it's money, but it's leadership and it's courage. Do the right thing.
I would like to see two things. One, transparency, and two, prosecutions. On the transparency front, currently the Section 117 system, which is the method for reporting foreign funding, is wildly deficient. Now, there are some legislative things in the works that aim to fix that, mainly the Deterrent Act. But broadly, universities underreport money. They are not held to account when they do. And even the changes proposed are not as tough as they could be. What we want to know is when you take foreign money as a university, where that money goes, what it was spent on. And we don't want a threshold above which you have to report that money. We want all monies reported. We need to know how foreign hostile states are buying American academia. There's also the issue of the 501c system. Now, I worked a little bit on this a few years ago. If I'm a foreign state, say I'm the Communist Chinese Party, if I don't want to have my funding to, say, Georgetown or Harvard or whatever, reported in Section 117, I set up a 501c in the United States. And there are over 30 CCP-run 501cs in the United States, as well as proxies for the CCP run by sympathetic Chinese-American interests. Any monies they give to the universities, even if it's a 501c directly controlled by China, is not reported as foreign funding because it's routed through our 501c system. This is such an obvious way to circumvent a bad system, made even worse. So that's the one thing, transparency. This must be fixed, and legislation and executive order can help us do that. The second is prosecution. Too many of these universities and their officials are essentially serving as foreign agents of hostile foreign regimes. They should be prosecuted under FARA. Unfortunately, there's been a weakening of FARA over the last few months. And I hope to see that reversed because there are too many universities that are operating on behalf of not just Islamist foreign interests, but the CCP, Russia, you name it. Whatever hostile entity you can think of, there's someone in the American university system working to help them. And the very last thing I'll say is we should reconsider prosecuting under material support laws. When Western academics go abroad, like ACMCU staff, to Turkey and elsewhere, and speak on the same platform as designated terrorists who are wanted by US Justice Department, there is a case to make there for material support. I would hope that the Department of Justice would start investigating those possibilities.
Thank you. Craig, you mentioned presidents of universities. We have a question about Board of Regents. Don't presidents report to the boards? Don't the boards have the ultimate power?
Sure, I mean, they do, but at the end of the day, the buck stops with the president. So yes, the board can influence, but it still stops with the president. The buck stops there, I would say.
We have a question about the activities of SJP and CARE. Do they constitute a RICO violation? And that's actually, David, a very good question for us because, in fact, we are engaged in a RICO action. If you would, Greg, take a moment to explain that.
RICO, or the Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organizations Act, was passed back in the 1970s in order to give federal law enforcement a tool to prosecute the mafia. But it also had a civil component, allowing it in 1983 to be used against Clans of America, the KKK, in 1994 against anti-abortion protesters by the National Organization of Women, and most recently used in actions in big tobacco, opiates, and Enron. The same tool that was used to dismantle these industries, or these organizations which were interfering with the economic activities of both for-profit and non-profit organizations, can theoretically be applied to the anti-Israel enterprise in the United States. But what you have to find are instances of economic loss suffered either by Jewish organizations, pro-Israel organizations. You can even make the argument that a caterer that lost an events order because of a protest could be a potential plaintiff. But what we've been able to do, because we've had two main challenges, one is that nonprofit organizations that serve Jewish students on campus are hesitant to get involved in litigation. They don't want to act as plaintiffs because they don't want to enter into a multi-year legal proceeding. The second is that to find an attorney or a group of attorneys who are RICO specialists, there's a much higher pleading standard associated with RICO cases than your simple civil conspiracy or any other tort violations that may be present. So it's really a tight knot to undo. But Middle East Forum has a solution. We've been able to start purchasing claims of organizations that are, in one way or another, have suffered economic loss. And in fact, we commissioned a study on this. $1.5 billion has been the amount of damage done to the U.S. economy and to organizations on campuses between October 7th, 2023 and February 2025. That's $1.5 billion that could ostensibly be used in a court proceeding if everybody got together, which is not going to be the case. But RICO offers you three solutions. One, it's treble damages, meaning that the defendants would have to pay $4.5 billion if found liable for the $1.5 billion in damages they caused. Two, you can find a judicial finding of fact, which labels SJP and CARE or other potential defendants as an illegal conspiracy. So if you find a finding in one court case through the process of collateral estoppel and res judicata, doesn't matter if you know what that is legally, but you can apply that standard to other courts across the country. So if the Southern District of New York says CARE and SJP were engaged in an illegal conspiracy against Jewish organizations who were the plaintiffs, or those who suffered the economic losses, you could take that to every court around the country and say, see, the Southern District of New York found this, now in Iowa or California or wherever else. And thirdly, the other side ends up having to pay your attorney's fees. So there is the possibility of getting litigation funding involved with this, getting those people who invest in lawsuits. So it's not just something which is for a nonprofit to do, but it may be something that a large hedge fund might want to get behind. And we have two results. One, to take down the money behind all these actions, and two, to act as a deterrent to other organizations trying to intimidate Jews on campus.
Before you leave, Greg, there's a question that you, as executive director of the forum, should answer. The question is, can the Middle East Forum help Professor Considine?
Yes, so here's two things that you should know about Professor Considine. One, we went to school together at American University.
That's right.
At the same time, from 2003 until I left for Israel in 2006, he graduated, and now you see his stellar success as an academic. And two, I have the privilege of having Professor Considine as a fellow of the Middle East Forum. So anything that you need, we're here to help.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
What about accreditation? This is open to anyone. Can the accreditation system be used to address these questions?
Well, I'll just point, I'm sorry, this doesn't directly answer your question. I'll just point out that Islamist groups that Islamist Watch tracks very readily see the accreditation system as vulnerable to Islamist influence, and there's been a spate of new Islamist higher education institutions launched over the last year, including some belonging to a sect called Dawati Islami. It's a South Asian sect involved in a number of violent actions in Europe, who have very successfully managed to convince the accreditation system to allow them to be providers of an education to young American males. I expect to see an explosion of that over the next few years.
Other thoughts? No. What about Congress? Should the U.S. Congress ban all foreign funding of U.S. universities? All is the question.
No.
No.
I think that would, sorry, after you.
I would say
you
no,
go.
too.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that the answer here is, as I said before, it's transparency, and it's enforced transparency. Funding isn't necessarily a problem if you know where it comes from and you can judge an institution on that basis. Currently, we don't know. We're in the dark as to how our education is purchased by foreign assets.
I think I'd add that not all foreign funds are a problem. You know, it does matter what they're funding, who they're funding, why. I am comfortable with bans if it's a select number of countries. Ones that we know that don't share the same values as us, do not respect our customs, and consistently do not follow them. I think that's when a ban could be appropriate. But otherwise, I think transparency is the way to go, and making sure we lower that threshold. You know, if money is going through affiliate organizations, making sure that they're also reported. A lot of universities want to pretend that those funds do not count as going to the university, even when it benefits them. So I think it's just having better transparency measures, but if we are going to do bans, make it targeted.
Agreed, yeah.
We're having all sorts of creative ideas. What about the tenure system? For you, Craig, as you are the insider here. The tenure system is set up for faculty to choose new faculty like themselves. Do you think that the tenure system should be abolished? What is the impetus to make change?
So I'm saying this as a non-tenured person. Okay, I got to Rice in 2015 on a one-year contract. I shouldn't be there, really. I shouldn't be there, right? You usually go for a year and you go chase tenure somewhere else. Personally, I think tenure is an archaic idea. I think it should be scrapped, and I'm not saying this in a bitter way. I think it's unhealthy. I think it, in a way, pushes a little bit of laziness among academics. I'm generally not for it. I don't know what you think, Sam, but I'm not for it.
I have no opinions on the subject, so Neetu.
I hold a different view. I don't think the problem is with the tenure system, and I actually think it can offer protections for faculty and researchers to either teach or conduct research without external influence. You know, something may not be popular in the public, but it's very vital to academics. I actually think the problem is our hiring systems, the demands that we ask of faculty applicants. You know, are we asking them to adhere to progressive principles or diversity, equity, and inclusion? I think if you amend the hiring process and who's actually getting in the door the first place, I think that would solve some of the issues. What I would also like to see, and this is kind of a big ask, and you could tell me if you think this is possible at the universities. I'm not so sure, but I think it would do a great deal of good. It is to have tenure audits. I think so many faculty have gone through the door who should not be at these universities. And I think having a tenure audit would, you know, making sure we have good faculty there, faculty who are doing good work, who are held to higher standards. I think that having a tenure audit system would actually rebuild trust with the public. And then I think the final thing, and this is, I think, the big problem, is, you know, I don't think all of the university is corrupt, but there are certain departments that are just toxic, and they need to go. And I could see states, especially with state universities, leveraging public funds, you know, using the power of the purse. If you see a department that is engaging in post-colonial studies and critical theory, those departments are probably not serious. They're probably not of value to students or the public. And we should be getting rid of those departments. Those departments are giving all the other departments that are doing a great job, engineering, economics, math, they're doing a great job day in, day out. And so I think we need to separate departments that are just doing an awful job and, departments that are doing a great job.
Craig, as a professor of sociology,
I'm in the
presumably she is alluding to you, so would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's the belly of the beast, really. It's everything I talked about this morning. And I've never really been part of my department because I'm not tenured. I'm somehow still there, miraculously, but I don't really have a very close relationship with the faculty members in my department. And I do know this, that since 7 October, I can sense a little bit of tension. People are kind of looking at me a little differently, a little concerned and questioning if I've gone off the deep end. But honestly, I mean, what am I supposed to do? I don't even go to department meetings because I'm non-tenured. So my primary objective there, in their eyes, is not to write books, even though I do that. It's not to do things like this, public events, which I do a lot of. It's to teach. And I do that, and I'm very passionate about it. And I get 70% of all of the sociology students in the door every year, 70%. I had 100 students in 2 classes this semester. So I do a lot of the dirty work, and I do everything, not to pat myself on the back, but I'm being honest. I do everything a tenured professor would do anyways. I just don't get why I'm not part of the club. And I'm not sure I want to be part of the club, to be honest.
Yeah, coming from an academic background, I understand that. We have a question about the Islamist students. Why are they there? Why are they here, I should say? Do they have are they just interested in their own careers? Are they interested in changing things in the United States? What do you know about them?
Well, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States really got going in the universities. It grew out of the Muslim student associations. In fact, the Muslim Student Association became ultimately the Islamic Society of North America, one of the key vehicles for the Brotherhood in the States, and from there, all sorts of offshoots.
It was the first Islamist organization in the United States.
The first major, no, of course, there were smaller sects,
yeah.
but in terms of the first major outpost of the Brotherhood, yes, absolutely. The MSA, the Muslim Student Association, and eventually ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America, came from there. Over the years, Islamist control of Muslim students' universities has weakened quite considerably, because whereas once it was a relatively small population, mostly from the same part of the world, mostly immigrants, now American Islam is huge and very diverse. And groups like the Muslim Brotherhood can no longer control this extraordinary diversity of views. So while they have some influence still in the traditional Muslim student associations, there are all manner of new Muslim student groups around the country, some Islamists, some not. And the good thing from our perspective is there's no uniform direction. There's very little coordination, a lot of disagreement. They don't get on. The growing threat that I am worried about when it comes to Islamist students in universities is the growing power of the Iranian regime's infrastructure within American campuses. Because Shia Islam and Iran is much more hierarchical, their student proxies and infrastructure tend to be much more coordinated. And we're seeing that. We saw that in the encampments, especially down in Texas, very clear involvement with pro-Hezbollah and pro-Tehran student groups down there, Shia student groups. So we expect to see a lot more of that. There are actually some things we're working on to do with Sunni Islamist students as well on university campuses. So you should see a few articles from the Middle East Forum about that over the next few months.
Thank you. Well, audience, it's 4:29. We will let you out a minute early. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Greg has something to say.